Welcome back, everyone, to Post Wrestling and our quarterly catch-up with Brandon Thurston of Wrestlenomics, a man that was extremely busy this week. We're going to be getting into all of that, but right off the bat, Brandon, are you ready to dive into the treasure chest of WWE today?
Yeah, the treasure chest, as Vince calls it. And he only spoke for like 30 seconds, maybe 60 seconds. And I think we have firmly entered the era where Vince is going to speak publicly as little as possible. Laura Martin didn't even bother to try this time.
No, she did not. I will blame you that I will not be able to listen to Vince McMahon on these calls any longer the same way after hearing your leaked audio that you were able to share recently on WrestleNomics. That was a brilliant job. For those that want to go back, I believe you put this out 2 weeks ago on your podcast, the unaired WWE conference call prior to WrestleMania, real exclusive on your part, which I thought was dead on and really, really well put together. I thought it was still hysterical.
We are still working to confirm the authenticity of that piece of audio, which was mysteriously, anonymously transmitted to me through blockchain. But a very interesting piece of audio. You can listen to it on WrestleNomics Radio about 2 weeks ago.
Is it an NFT yet? Are you able to bid on this?
No, we don't really know who owns it. That's the thing, I guess. But maybe I will just have to sort of de facto claim ownership.
Well, there's so much to go through here. Coming out of the first quarter earnings report, it was yet another strong quarter from WWE, outdoing what analysts expected, a net income of over $43 million and revenue of $263.5 million. And it seems like the analysts were maybe not expecting this big upfront payment from Peacock that was pretty sizable and lifted the earnings this quarter.
Yeah. So what really drove this, like you said, it's the upfront money apparently from Peacock. Usually with these media deals, they are escalating over time. The Peacock deal is a 5-year deal, just like the Raw and SmackDown US deals are 5-year deals. But there's apparently in the first year, maybe especially in the first quarter, really big upfront payments. I don't totally understand why. There's some vague explanation about the transfer of intellectual property and subscribers. I'm guessing that WWE felt that there might be a sort of a lame duck period with subscribers where they're not going to have a lot of subscribers in this transition period. So there might be sort of a gap. And to make up for that, maybe they got a lot of upfront money from Peacock. So I think year one is going to be the biggest year of this 5-year deal. Year two will probably be lower. And then from there, it'll escalate from year two. But almost $80 million in the network segment this time, which is up from they never really went past $50 million, at least in the last few quarters in that segment. So that was really big. And I think just that uncertainty on how to estimate that piece of business for WWE this quarter is what led to a lot of analysts underestimating it. When I put my models together at first, I had a really high number in there. And I saw what the consensus EPS was, and I figured I must be getting something wrong here. And then I sort of refigured my calculation and it ended up closer to the average analyst estimate. But yeah, this is also, by the way, the end of the W Network subscriber count. I thought maybe we would still get an international subscriber count, but we did not. That slide has been stripped from the KPIs document and not even in. I've looked through the 10Q. It's not in the big quarterly report either.
Yeah, that was an interesting part of the actual rollout of the earnings report, of seeing, how much information was going to be disclosed. And it seems that when it comes to the WWE network, this is going to be the least transparent we've ever seen of how the network is performing since it launched 7 years ago. And I think we look at this as well. It seems like they're also a lot of these popularity metrics that we go to for these earnings report to kind of get a glimpse into all of that. I mean, even down to television viewership, that's been a hot button issue on these calls. Nick Khan outlining the fact that we are looking at the same thing buyers are, and that's digital viewing, streaming, linear viewership. That's just one piece of the puzzle. So it's almost that if we're trying to look for things, like there is a lot that is not going to be publicly available in these earnings reports that we had in the past that could kind of lean on for a better viewpoint of how certain areas are performing.
Yeah. And COVID too has complicated that. With merchandise, their e-commerce, their online merchandise business is doing really well. And it's really making up almost completely for the lack of any venue merchandise. But I don't really know how to compare that to the pre-COVID era. There's obviously no ticket sales happening. Analyzing TV ratings. I think I've come up with a good way by looking at the top 50 cable programs and sort of comparing the year-over-year attrition in that to the year-over-year attrition in any given wrestling program. There's good old Google web search out there still, which on a year-over-year basis, WWE has been declining for a number of years in a row. So there's those sort of things that we can look at. But in terms of things from WWE Network and their public filings, it's getting smaller and smaller. They said in this call, as Nick Khan did in his interview with Colin Cowherd just before WrestleMania, that, Peacock has been a huge success. Stephanie McMahon called WrestleMania the most viewed live event in Peacock's young history. They're talking about looking for similar deals as well, internationally, but we don't get any sort of idea of, how popular was this WrestleMania compared to others. This era of tracking pay-per-view buys, which turned into tracking WWE Network subscribers. That era has solidly come to an end here.
It would be very interesting to, and I don't expect like this to necessarily be answered on any of these calls, but the structure of the Peacock deal. I mean, a little bit with Christina Salen noting that the Peacock deal, she mentioned like SummerSlam, you might see a larger amount that quarter, but is this just a straight licensing fee that Peacock is paying every year that they know down to the dollar will be paid each year? Is there an incentive structure in place as well that if WWE outdoes its performance, there's a bonus structure in place there? Cause that's kind of the model that we could compare with UFC and ESPN Plus, that, it appears from the reporting that is out there that it's, whether the UFC comes out with a gigantic Conor McGregor level pay-per-view or just a run-of-the-mill title fight, like they are insured the same amount each month from ESPN Plus.
I would think it's guaranteed money. I do recall that comment that Christina Salen, who is the chief financial officer, made, where she made it sound like there was payment tied specifically to the airing of pay-per-view events. But there were no questions by the analysts about whether WWE is incentivized to perform well or to especially attract subscribers, whether they're compensated more if they attract more versus less. That's totally unclear. I would think it's, part of what WWE wants here is to de-risk their business and they have even predictable revenues over their entire year. So I would think that it's pretty predictable and guaranteed, and they have a really good idea of what they're going to be generating in terms of revenue. They're not ready to give any more specific guidance about what they expect in terms of revenue or their favorite profit metric, adjusted OIBDA. And that's mostly just because of the uncertainty around live events, in particular, the large scale international events. Don't call them Saudi Arabia events. That I'm sort of modeling in, and I think a lot of analysts are modeling, and we'll probably get one in late in the year here.
I really think we're just a few steps away from that term being trademarked to actually brand these events. WWE presents large scale international event this week on the WWE Network.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how they language that on the TV, if they're going to say something similar or if they're actually going to say Saudi Arabia.
What did we learn in terms of live events? I mean, these were certainly alluded to on the call, but what did you take in terms of their strategy this year when it comes to live events beyond just the weekly television?
Not that much. It's more sort of a solidification of what they had said earlier. They don't expect live events to happen in the first half of the year. They pretty strongly do expect the live events to happen sometime in the second half of the year. So maybe by early Q4, that would be October, maybe. We didn't get any sort of impression about, what everybody likes to talk about is, are they ever going to do house shows again? I don't think I got any insight into whether or not they're going to do house shows again. But, maybe something by SummerSlam. I've just separately, I think there's been some reports there that maybe they'll do another ticketed event for SummerSlam. But, we know that they made about, $6.2 million in ticket sales for WrestleMania. Stephanie said 50,000 people, attended WrestleMania. The power of belonging. She gave a very descriptive and poetic representation of WrestleMania in the earnings call. But we've got documents from the Tampa Sports Authority showing that paid attendance was about 40,000. I think 40,602, I think is the number. A few more tickets than that were distributed. A few less than that actually attended, maybe just due to COVID hesitancy, maybe due in part to an overeager secondary market. So,
as of now, like next year, like it's been promoted as such as a one night event, but I did find it interesting when Stephanie McMahon, it was with Bill Simmons, she was pretty clear in her preference over splitting up WrestleMania over 2 nights and agreeing that it's too long an event in its past form over the last several years. Like certainly I think like there's the ability that if they feel strongly enough that they could change things. But I guess what do you think goes into that decision-making process, and how much of the performance on Peacock, like does Peacock have probably say in the matter? Because that's where, to me, it goes to like this bonus structure. Like where would WWE be incentivized to incur the expenses of a second night of WrestleMania, probably not be able to sell the same amount of tickets to both nights? And if they're not being paid more by Peacock, I guess where are WWE incentivized to do 2 nights?
I think it probably just comes down to Vince, and you never know when Vince is going to have some kind of weird peeve about something, about whether or not he wants to make it 2 nights. But I do think making it 2 nights I think it would almost certainly lead to greater ticket revenue. You think about it, like in past years, like WrestleMania has just barely sold out, or maybe in some years I think maybe came close to selling out, but not quite. But I think having, say, 120,000 tickets available versus 60,000, I think you'd get a lot of people who just, who in a one night scenario would attend one, but a lot of people in a 2 night scenario would attend 2.
I think so too. I think it'd be a pretty healthy percentage that are traveling, or they're planning to go Sunday, and I'm already spending this much on this weekend. What's another $150 for a ticket the Saturday night? I think like it might not. I would be very surprised if they could fill a stadium that large 2 nights in a row. But I think overall, I still think it would be a net positive. Yeah,
and I know W is not a wrestling company, and they're only focused on themselves. But you have the example in New Japan, who's just kind of run the experiment for them in a different market, but with their 2 night Tokyo Dome before the pandemic, they did that. But I think it's a way to, in a 1 night scenario, in a non-pandemic situation, you draw somewhere between $15 and $17 million in ticket revenue, and you can probably get close to doubling that, probably short of doubling that, but nearly doubling that. And it would probably be more expensive, yes, but you're still doing it in a fixed location. So it's not as if you're tearing down that set, moving it to another stadium, which would make it a lot more expensive. I would imagine Peacock would have, no issue. I mean,
I think Peacock would want it. Like if this reception to this past WrestleMania, I have no reason to dispute that. I'm sure they would absolutely love to have 2 nights of WrestleMania over 1, for sure.
Yeah. And we're in this period now where W has this enormous roster, and it has 2 really prominent flagship shows, not to mention NXT. So I think, as everybody knows, these shows otherwise are going to be 7 hours long or whatever. So it's probably the best thing for the business, and it's probably the best thing for their fans. And, there was a lot of positive feedback about, okay, that was a lot easier than it usually is with WrestleMania being 2 nights.
Nick Khan was, of course, pretty much spearheading the call. And I thought, being very forthright in his expectations about, flat out stating he does not believe that the NHL's relationship with NBC will continue after the conclusion of their existing deal, which has been a very long-term relationship between the 2 entities. And to me, it was like very, Khan was very much flexing his knowledge of what is going to be happening down the road with Apple, with the NHL, and just spilling the tea here, Brandon.
Yeah, this was a Nick Khan podcast, I think, is what this earnings call was. This was prognosticator Nick Khan giving his thoughts about the media business. I saw someone who's a former executive for a major network, tweeting that, is he actually going to talk about the earnings here, or is he just going to give sort of his musings on the media business? So he talked, I think the biggest takeaway here, this is just sort of my speculation analysis. He's talking big about Amazon and even introducing Apple into the conversation with the idea that, Apple is obviously making this play for the NFL. He's suggesting that, Amazon is going to have Thursday night exclusive in the next round of the NFL deal, but he's speculating that Amazon might be negotiating to get that Thursday night exclusive before the new deal kicks in. And also, like I said, introducing Apple as possibly getting interested in live or live sports content. So I think what's happening here is he's sort of showing that in the next round of U.S. negotiations, which are, the most important piece of business that WWE has, they probably stay on NBC Universal with Raw. They probably stay on USA Network because they're so involved with NBC Universal in terms of now with Peacock and with the reality programming that's on E. But maybe SmackDown is the thing that gets negotiated most aggressively. So I think if I'm Fox and I'm paying attention to this earnings call, that's interesting that I don't know that Fox was mentioned at all, but Amazon and Apple certainly were. So, but that's the big thing for media rights and sports rights is that, are these FANG companies, these big tech companies, which are some of the most valuable companies in the world, are they going to get involved in bidding for live sports rights? Because if they do, that's even better for companies that own valuable live sports content like WWE.
And also making it very clear, as I think everyone assumed after the Peacock deal, that is going to be their strategy of just licensing out these rights in all regions of the world, following, what they started with here in Canada with Rogers, and just seeing the value. It just seems like we are going to create as much content as possible and sell it for as much as possible. And that's going to be the strategy of the network. Yeah.
They've done it in Canada with Rogers. They've done it in India with Sony. Sony Live is the distributor of the W Network in India. And Sony is also their TV partner. Now they're doing it in the US with Peacock through NBCU. I think we might have talked about this last time. The biggest market that's left then would be the UK. Mm-hmm. And I don't know enough about the UK media ecosystem to speculate about who would be a potential partner there. But the UK would be the biggest partner left. Maybe Australia, maybe something in the MENA region. But yeah, that's what they want to do. And it sort of, as I said earlier when we were talking about the WWE Network, it de-risks the business to not have to rely on the volatility of subscribers, but to get these larger media businesses that have far greater resources to just pay you up front for it. And it speaks to the big pivot that I see between the Barrios era and the Nick Khan era, where in the Barrios era, I think Barrios envisioned WWE as learning from the lessons of the big tech companies, where we're going to have our own streaming service. We're going to harness data and get a lot of value out of data. And the Nick Khan era is more about saying, okay, that's not our area of expertise. We don't have the massive resources to do something like that necessarily, but we can sell our content, our very valuable intellectual property, to these businesses that have massive resources and can pay us large fees up front, and then can execute that strategy with their streaming service, in part by using our very valuable content and IP to do it.
Do you take a step back and look at, when you outline the characteristics and what we have seen implemented from the George Barrios, Michelle Wilson regime to Nick Khan, it just seems like two polar opposite philosophies to the core of this industry. And you go back a year, we were still in that volatility period where the presidency seats, they had been vacated with Barrios and Wilson being let go. Frank Riddick is there as the interim CFO, but this is pre-Nick Khan, pre-Christina Salen. And from one year to the next, where this company sits, that is a radical shift that they underwent. And yes, the stock took a big hit when Barrios and Wilson left, but it is quite extraordinary when you see how rapidly they shifted such an immense viewpoint of the network and largely their strategy going from one end of the spectrum to the other.
Yeah, I think this is where I think we have to give Vince some credit here, and maybe Stephanie McMahon too. Vince is the one who made the decision in January 2020 to abruptly fire Barris and Wilson, which maybe wasn't the best way to go about that because it did upset the stock price, as you mentioned. But he's the one who kind of decided, right, that, doing the network as they were, trying to attract subscribers direct to consumer was not the best way to go. And the best way to go was to sell their rights, to a major streaming service. I wonder too, if, do you get a Nick Khan or even Christina Salen, to be major executives in your company, if WWE had not done what it's done in the last 10 years or so to improve its brand image, which has pretty much been Stephanie's mission all this time since she's been chief brand officer. Vince said one of the few things he did say on this call is that he feels that they've got the best management team that they've ever had. And,
I don't disagree.
I don't doubt that. And like I said, I think part of that is just being able to recruit the quality of talent that they have now in their C-suite, right? Like, I don't know if this is the Attitude Era company that you're able to get a major talent agent from CAA to come in and be your CRO and president. So maybe that's a factor as well, that W is better able to attract the right kind of talent that they need at the right moment. And in this case, it's somebody like Nick Khan, who's very experienced in negotiating very valuable media deals. And that's clearly the mission of their company now, is to get the most out of those deals.
From your perspective, Brandon, what's been like the user experience for this transfer over to Peacock, and specifically over WrestleMania weekend? Because, well, obviously us in Canada don't have the opportunity to view this, the Peacock migration.
Yeah, it's, I think there's been a lot of upheaval among my friends on Twitter who are used to getting access to the archives. That stuff is not as much there anymore, right? Like I think there's only a handful of WCW pay-per-views on the network right now. There's suspicion that, the full archive will never get there. WWE has put out a press release saying that, by SummerSlam, it'll all be over there. I asked Rick Cordella, who's the CRO of Peacock, whether it would really be all over there. Would the territory content like Mid-South and Mid-Atlantic and World Class, is that all really going to go over? He said it would.
Peacock demands those Mid-Atlantic tapes. They are not going to fall through the cracks.
Absolutely. But after that, there was, the Roddy Piper and Bad News Brown match edited out. There's the Survivor Series 2005 segment with Vince McMahon and encountering Booker T. That was edited out. So I don't know. We'll see what happens. I haven't heard anything new that's been edited. I think the Triple H Nation of Domination DX Blackface segment has been edited out wherever that was appearing. But I'm kind of confident that they'll get everything over there. As somebody who likes to watch old wrestling now and then, though, it is disappointing not being able to have that huge archive of the W Network, the huge library that they have across all these different territorial brands over the years. But yeah, it seems okay. I know there were issues with the pausing and things like that. That's not something personally that I've really used, but yeah, hopefully it will get better with time, and at least it is about half the price than it was before.
Yeah, we're very spoiled here in Canada. Like, from the time that Rogers became the distributor, it's its own channel, if you have the package. So, I mean, we really take that for granted. And that deal is coming up. That was a 10-year deal they signed in 2014 for Raw, SmackDown, and to distribute the network, which is like a pretty brilliant deal that, Rogers Sportsnet was able to, land, for that significant amount of time in 2014, and what the Canadian media landscape will be like several years from now. Rogers they're still in the midst of an enormous NHL deal that they have paid a great amount for, of what their appetite will be for. I'm sure they want to renew, but at how much, given a 10-year gap between their last deal.
Yeah, interestingly, when I was doing some research recently about WWE's, about just looking at the Hollywood Reporter articles that came out in 2018 when WWE made its new US TV deals, and those mentioned that WWE was in the middle of negotiating a 10-year deal with NBC Universal. which I'd not remembered, or I don't know if I had read that at the time. But then Nick Khan came in and said, wait, no, we're going to split the rights of Raw and SmackDown and sell SmackDown to Fox or to somebody else. So that was interesting. We also got some information here about NXT. NXT has moved to Tuesday. Nick Khan, in his further prognostications, said that he believes that NBC and the NHL are done doing business at the end of this term, that they're not going to renew. So I'd been under the impression that, the biggest reason for NXT moving from Wednesday to Tuesday has got to be that NBC Sports Network is shutting down. That's where Wednesday Night Hockey lives in the U.S. And so they're probably going to put Wednesday Night Hockey on the USA Network. He says no. NBC and the NHL are done doing business, and that didn't have anything to do with it. So now WWE only focuses on themselves. Everything is competition for them. So they're not worried about AEW, of course. But he's really happy they're really pleased with how the ratings are doing. And this is, so you can kind of see when Nick Khan says this, it matches up with things that Paul Levesque said about the Monday to Tuesday and how that's some kind of a lead-in effect, Raw being on Monday and NXT being on Tuesday. I'm not sure how much I believe that, but you can see that they were both in the same meeting where this message was formulated. But NXT announced a new multi-year deal, which they announced in conjunction with their announcement that they were moving to Tuesday. And there were some questions about whether that new deal changes anything in how the analysts should formulate their financial estimates. And Christina Salem basically said no. They're very pleased with the new deal, but it doesn't really change their guidance. So what I read from that is that the NXT deal, the new one, which will go into effect this fall, they'll start getting paid for it later this fall in Q4, is not a big upgrade. Or if it is a big upgrade, it's from such a low point anyway that it doesn't make a huge difference to their business. I found some SEC correspondence with WWE recently, which is dated from June, which I hadn't come across yet, dated from June 2020. And anyway, it led me to believe that the NXT deal is probably worth somewhere around $20 million. There's a number of scenarios and variables that you can play with, but the most plausible scenarios to me are ones in which the math works out so that NXT is worth about $20 million per year in the first term, the first 2 years. So I would imagine it's worth probably about the same. This is a company that generates $1 billion in revenue per year, so $20 million is not a massive deal. And when you renew that deal and raise it, or get a no raise new deal or slightly lower, it doesn't make a huge difference to your business and to how you would estimate revenues going forward. So that's what I think about the NXT deal. I think it's a relatively small deal, $20 million per year. If you compare that to SmackDown, $205 million per year. Those are both 2-hour programs. A 3-hour program, Raw, $265 million per year. I'm talking about the U.S. region, obviously. AEW is $44 million per year. So they're more than double if I'm right, they're more than double what NXT is. But then again, AEW is ranking more highly on at least in P18 to 49 than NXT is. So yeah, we'll see how AEW is able to renegotiate their terms next time. But yeah, that's what we learned about NXT.
Yeah, and Nick Khan, among the competitors that they face, is also people that might make the decision that tonight I'm going to sit back and I'm going to text all night. Which,
yes,
I'm not disputing that some people may fall into that, but I don't think I've ever said to myself, you know what, tonight, my plans, texting. I'm going to sit back, I'm texting all night.
Well, that just proves that you're a millennial, not Gen Z.
No, I'm out of the loop. So, a very real thing. In terms of, we're still just 2 weeks into NXT and AEW being unopposed. Certainly, I think AEW has outdone many people's expectations. The fact that this week, just over 1.1 million viewers, after seeing the numbers last week, Brandon, did you expect that they were going to be able to retain, at this level, week 2?
I figured, over under for this week was 1 million. They still did 1.1 million. So they performed, I guess, a little bit over what I was expecting. The key demo is not moving as much.
No.
So I don't know that Turner and or AEW is as excited about that as maybe the wrestling fan world is, because we get to the grand milestone of 7 figures here with 1 million viewers. But I think it's exciting that to see that AEW is growing its viewership, and it appears to be. I know the Torch has reported some DVR viewership information that makes it look as if it's not just that people are watching less on DVR and now are watching more live same day, but that their DVR viewership is holding up pretty well as well. So it seems as if they're adding viewers, in fact. So I wonder if that's just now that those two programs, NXT and AEW, are not running head to head, there's just less confusion and indecision about which one to watch, and you know exactly what program is on what night, and maybe that's just making the experience simpler for the wrestling fan who's thinking about watching wrestling in prime time. But yeah, we'll see. I think AEW has got a great argument if they continue to do the ratings that they're doing for the next year or two. I think they've got a great argument that they're well undervalued. They ranked number 2 in P18 to 49 for 2 weeks in a row, and they are improving a little bit in P18 to 49. They can't beat MTV's challenge just yet, but you've got significantly. I don't know. AEW is doing like a 0.4 in the key demo right now. Say Raw is doing something like a 0.6. SmackDown doing similar. So that's the difference there. But the difference in what they're getting in terms of a TV rights fee is huge compared to that. So there's a great argument that AEW is well undervalued considering what they're being paid now, and that in their next deal, which might be negotiated around the same time that the WWE deal is being negotiated around 2023. And we could see AEW get a really big increase, but probably still valued well below what Raw and SmackDown are valued, but a lot more than $44 million per year.
Do you look at the two any differently, just in terms of the entire full view of each company and where it's trying to direct its audience? Like for AEW, it's heavily contingent on that key demo, because they are needing like advertising support, and if you are a fan of AEW, you're largely asked to spend 4 times a year on a pay-per-view and watch the show. That is like the business model of the company, absent live events. With a product like NXT, for any of the WWE products, a huge contingent of it is, we want to use this to build our emerging streaming platform. And there's just a lot of different areas where, yes, we want our main demo, but when you look at the overall, we're not breaking down demos when it comes to streaming numbers. We don't care if you're 100 years old. If you have a credit card and can sign up, you're of value to us. And AEW, they have not entered that space yet where you can truly get the value, I think, out of your entire audience as opposed to a segment of it. Yeah.
And hopefully in the next several months, we'll be in an era where tickets are being sold. Merchandise is still being sold. And as you mentioned, pay-per-views for AEW are being sold, although it's only 4 times a year. But I don't know. I think AEW's focus on the demo is more about what Turner tells them to do, and they're not in a position to question their TV partner that pays them the majority of their revenue, probably or close to it. So I think there's a lot of value in every TV subscriber, regardless of what their age is, because now older people, I guess, are going to die more soon than younger people are. And 1849 might tell you something about what the future of your TV subscribership is going to look like. But every home that's tuned into your program represents a home that's paying a cable subscription. And that's what accounts for the majority of cable networks' revenue. It's not advertising. Advertising is about 1/3, and subscriptions, affiliate fees, are about 2/3. So I think there's huge value still in every viewer, even though advertising to people over the age of 50 is not very valuable. So I don't know if that's, I forget what your original question was. John,
No. That totally makes sense. It's something I've always looked at, that, if we're looking at a show like The Challenge, like if you're looking at this from the pure television perspective, like there's like how you monetize and make money off of a show like that. It's pro wrestling is just a different beast, because there are many other ways historically that you can make, money off of your audience, that it's, for it's one value for your television partner. It's another for a company that can, make money different ways. Like a sitcom is not doing live events multiple times a week. A sitcom is not, heavily into merchandise and such. So wrestling is this unique animal where I think that there is value, but, it's, relative to your different segments, of course.
Absolutely.
We'll end off here because I guess the next big date, for a large scale event, that's going to be the annual meeting of stockholders happening on May 27th. And based on this week, with a lot of shakeup behind the scenes at WWE, are you expecting this to sort of be the introduction of kind of your new front-facing team for WWE with, a lot of new hires that have been made? This is typically that time where we get the procession of speeches from the key departments, and I imagine a lot of new faces that will be introduced to those WWE stockholders.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of who spoke last time. I think most of the people who spoke last time, with the exception, I guess, of interim CFO Frank Riddick, who's still on the board of directors, I think they're all still there. I know Jared Donlin spoke. I'm pretty sure he's still with WWE. I mean, I guess we could see some of these new hires that Nick Khan has made. There's 2 or 3 just announced recently, just the other day. But yeah, May 27th is the annual shareholders meeting. I'm not sure we're going to get audio of it. I'm hoping we will. Last year is the first time I've ever heard an annual shareholders meeting, which is different from these quarterly reports. Totally different thing. Right? They're not going to introduce a bunch of financial information on this. This is a meeting for their shareholders to come in and ask questions. So hopefully we'll get some audio of it, and we'll get some interesting questions. Yeah, it's not the usual Q&A that these quarterly earnings calls are, where it's stock analysts asking questions that will help them determine their estimate and help them write accurate estimates of W's business. These are shareholders who have interests that are nearer to the wrestling fans' interests. They want to see the company succeed, but they're also, sometimes they're not happy about the ratings. Sometimes they're not happy about the creative. So it's a little bit more fun if you're looking to see people, question the booking or something like that. But yeah, we'll see. I hope we do get audio, but I'll be refreshing corporate.w.com that day.
They should be doing this in the Thunderdome, Brandon. Just hit the cheer buttons.
Yeah.
As they announced their plans for global expansion. Nick Khan comes out. We're going after Mexico. Cheers, cheers.
Yeah.
Well, that is going to wind things down here. I guess my final thing, Brandon, is had you been able to get on to the Q&A, you get one question. You don't get 4 questions like Curry Baker. You just get one question. Who would you direct it at, and what would have been your question that you would have posed to the panel?
I guess I'm personally curious about how much they see the value of NXT and what the value of those deals really are. I don't think that's something that they would answer, but and do they see that as a brand that's really going to grow value in the way that they said it would when they took it off of the network? When they took it off of the network, it didn't really hurt network subscribers, but is it returning the value that they hoped it would when they made that decision? We're now entering the second term of that deal, and are those rights values stagnant? Are they growing? Is NXT as an operation, if you sort of in an accounting sense sort of isolated it and counted all of its revenues against its expenses? I don't know if you should count the Performance Center in there or not, but if you did something like that, is NXT now a profit driver? Or is it actually contributing to more expense than it is revenue? So what's the deal with that? And, I'm sure there's a lot more interesting questions you could ask about the Performance Center. Just what we've seen lately in wrestling, just in terms of kind of what AEW has done on a much smaller scale with fewer resources. Is the Performance Center as effective as it could be, considering how much money they spend on it? I'm not sure. So yeah, just I guess some NXT and Performance Center questions are the first thing that comes to mind.
Yeah, and I think also like in terms like we heard from Nick Khan recently discussing like Mexico as a potential spot that they would be one of these affiliates, but how especially after a pandemic, the idea of going to all these different locations, the idea of localized performance centers, like that's enormous expenses. That I mean, is that expense worth what you see as the light at the end of the tunnel of creating unique programming for all these different spots and being able to sell them as well? Like what is that appetite going to be long term, which is a big question.
Yeah. You're talking about the Cowherd interview where he mentioned that
yes.
Latin America and specifically Mexico are regions that he targets as areas of growth opportunity internationally. And he alluded, not by name, but he alluded to CMLL and AAA. He clarified that they're not looking at acquiring either of those companies, but that I think maybe the idea is, Nick Khan recognizes that, look, Mexico has is a country where wrestling is very popular. They have a huge history of wrestling. And I wonder if Japan fits into that sort of idea as well. I think that makes sense on one hand. As a lifelong wrestling fan, I'm happy that he recognizes that that maybe Mexico is the place to go, and then maybe not so much of a focus on China because at least Mexico has a wrestling history. But I do that. It's a strategy that could either go really well or it could be a huge disaster. Do you want to go into a country where you might be seen as the sort of big giant corporate enemy who's trying to swallow everybody up? Mexico is a very different wrestling culture, creatively, mechanically in the ring. We've seen what happened when people like Sin Cara, the original Mystico, was brought into WWE, and I think a very crude summary of it is that people didn't think he knew how to wrestle. Now, I'm sure part of the problem was probably maybe Sin Cara was difficult to work with in some ways, but Lucha will be looked at by the status quo of WWE producers as they're doing a lot of things wrong. So are you going to get sort of people who are, very familiar with the Lucha style and with the Lucha creative and with the Lucha audience to help you out there? I think it makes a lot more sense in the UK where, that's a major English speaking market where you have a huge WWE history in the UK. But WWE is not the most popular wrestling brand in Mexico. And I think you could say the same about Japan, too.
Well, Brandon, we always appreciate the time sitting down, dissecting these earnings calls. You can find all of this analysis and so much more up at WrestleNomics.com. And what is coming up this weekend? It's been a very, very busy week, and people can, of course, support you on Patreon, but give our listeners a preview of what is to come in the WrestleNomics world.
Sure. Well, I already have I think about a 40-minute podcast that is on Patreon right now, patreon.com/WrestleNomics. But I'll be recording this weekend, probably recording Sunday, probably releasing the podcast Monday, where I will talk with Chris Gullo we'll probably discuss more about this WQ1 as I comb through the details a little bit more. We'll be discussing the WrestleMania attendance with these wonderful audits that I've received, that many of us received from the Tampa Sports Authority, trying to make sense of those, and whatever else is going on in wrestling business news. I don't know, maybe we'll touch on the drama of people getting their belongings sent to them in trash bags. But yeah, you can check that out. I have an article about the WrestleMania attendance that is on WrestleNomics.com. I have a couple articles about this WQ1 2021 report that are also on WrestleNomics.com.
They're award-winning charts. Like I got the data sent from the Tampa Sports Authority, and what you took from what they sent into graphical form, I mean, it's like a before and after picture. That was just stunning what you did.
It was really hard to figure out.
It was extremely complex. I was very impressed with how you did this in like record time as well. So you did a fantastic job with this.
And then later that night, one of my colleagues in the wrestling journalism space got on Skype with me, and we double checked my math for about an hour and a half, and everything seems to be okay. So yeah.
Well, there you go. If nothing else, Florida tremendous transparency when it comes to these things.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Is Tampa Sports Authority is the manager of Raymond James Stadium, so it's like it's a government-managed venue. So that's why we were able to get that. So that's something to sort of watch for in the future. Whenever there's a government agency involved, you may be able to make some sort of public records request.
Well, Brandon, thanks as always. You can give him a follow at Brandon Thurston. All of his work can be found at WrestleNomics.com. And that will wrap it up. We will be back with many shows coming up this weekend, including after UFC 261 in front of a full capacity crowd in Jacksonville, Florida. But that is it for us. Thank you for listening.